Someone asks you for something, and in half a second before you answer, you already know that you really want to say no. And before you can stop yourself, you say yes. And then you spend the rest of the week quietly furious at them, mostly, which is probably unfair, and at yourself, which is totally worse. It starts with a simple, jarring realization. The moment you realize that being assertive doesn't have to mean being unkind. It's a strange thing to have to say out loud that you can be productive and direct without being nasty. But until you pull those two ideas apart, you spend your life walking on eggshells. You're listening to Amplify with Purpose, Business and Life Unlocked. I'm Odette de Beer. This is where we have real conversations about building a business and a life that actually works. No scripts, no fluff, and nothing you'll have to pretend you didn't hear. If you're ready to lead with purpose and deliver with consistency, you're in the right room. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Amplify with Purpose. I'm Odette. In my work with women leaders, I see the pattern that repeats until it becomes a baseline for how they run in their business. Somewhere along the way, two words got fused together: assertive and aggressive. Once they are glued together, being direct is no longer an option. Directness is read as becoming the very thing they aren't willing to be. So they take the long way around. The email that takes 20 minutes to say a thing that takes one line. The softening sentence before the actual sentence. The search for a good enough reason that justifies a simple boundary. This isn't about being polite. It's a constant negotiation of identity where a clear no feels like a character flaw. So, here are 4 truths about the word no. First, adults advise, children explain. Here's a sentence I said in a coaching session, and I'll say it to you. Adults advise and children explain. Think about the last time someone told you no. Did they give you a paragraph, a justification, a little apology at the end to make sure you weren't upset? Probably not, depending on who you spoke to. They said, I can't this week. And you said, no worries. And you moved on with your life. And you didn't think about it again. Now, think about the last time you said no. How long was your no sentence? Because here's the thing about explanation. It's actually not politeness. It's permission seeking. When you attach a reason to your no, you're handing the other person a document to assess. And that document can be argued with. Oh, but if that's the only reason, then surely you could. You gave them the crowbar, and then you're surprised when there's a gap. Really? You don't owe anyone an explanation. You can offer one. That's a gift. And sometimes it's the right one. But offering and owing are very different transactions. And most of us have never done the first one. Now, the part where research gets genuinely uncomfortable, there's a body of work in occupational psychology, and it's something called overcommitment. It sits inside effort-reward imbalance model, and it measures exactly the thing we're talking about today. It's the person who can't switch off, who takes on more than the role requires, who people say, you sacrifice so much for this. In 2025, a longitudinal study published in the Spanish Journal of Psychology did something new with it. It followed people over time and treated workaholism and overcommitment not as 2 separate traits, but as 2 stages of a single process, one leading into the other, and from there into burnout. Here's the finding that I want you to sit with. They tested whether job satisfaction protected people, whether loving your work buffered you. It didn't. It strengthened the pathway. The more satisfied people were, the more strongly the drive to work fed into overcommitment, and overcommitment is what feeds burnout. Yes, I want you to hear that again. Listen to it for yourself. Loving what you do is not a safety feature. If anything, it's an accelerant. Because when you love it, every yes feels justified. Every extra hour feels like a devotion rather than a depletion. The women I coach are not burning out because they're in the wrong business. A great deal of them are burning out because they're in exactly the right one. And there's no natural break on a thing you love. Assertive is not aggressive. And the people who say it is are telling you about themselves. The third truth is that there's one thing that we've all been afraid of. There's a 2025 study university ambassadors published in CCF Transactions on Persuasive Computing and Interaction. They looked at assertiveness and job burnout and found a strong relationship. The more assertive people were, can you guess it? Yep, the lower the burnout. With psychological resources sitting in between as the mechanism. It's one study in one sector, and I'll take it as a signal rather than a law, but the signal points to the same direction as everything else in the field. Being able to say what you need is not a personality luxury. It's load-bearing. Now, I have to be honest with you about the other side of this, because I'd be doing you a disservice if I made it sound like it was cost-free. Research on assertiveness at work consistently finds that women, and particularly women of color, get read as aggressive or for behavior that reads as decisive in someone else. That's real. That's documented. That's not in your head. But here's what I want you to do with that. And it's not so be careful. It's this. When someone calls your boundary aggressive, they are giving you information about their comfort, not about your behavior. Those are two different reports, and only one of them is about you. You don't need people to love your boundaries. They're allowed to be uncomfortable. You have to love your boundaries because you're the one who has to live inside the life that they build. Here's the fourth truth. And this is where it gets practical and where I want to bring in my book. The catalytic code is built on 3 movements in this order: purpose, then performance, then legacy. Purpose is the internal clarity that anchors your identity. Performance is the disciplined execution that turns clarity into consistent, trustworthy delivery. And legacy is what then remains. Notice the order because it explains why no is so hard. When purpose comes first, you have something to say no on behalf of. The request isn't being weighed against your mood or likability. It's being weighed against a thing you've already decided matters. It's a comparison you can make in half a second without a paragraph. When your purpose isn't yet settled or anchored, every request arrives with equal standing. There's nothing to measure it against. So the only variable left is how the other person will feel. That is an unwinnable way to run a week. And in the book, I write about the 5 elements that have to line up before you can build from who you actually are. And the one that betrays women most reliably is the schedule. I saw it in the work I do with my clients. A woman has been describing the same calendar problem for 3 months. It isn't volume. It's that her calendar contains her client work and almost nothing else. No school runs, no meals, no 8 o'clock pickup. And every one of those things happen every single day. And not one of them is written down. So her calendar shows a Tuesday with 3 free blocks. The real Tuesday has none. And on Friday, she looks at the gap and concludes, she's failed. She didn't fail. Her calendar failed her. By promising a woman who was never going to show up that day. Here's why that belongs in an episode about saying no, and a no needs somewhere to stand. If your calendar doesn't contain your actual life, you have no evidence that you're full. And the woman with no evidence will always say yes. This week's ritual takes 2 seconds, and it goes next to the sticky note you already know from this show. 1 win, 1 focus, 1 block. It's called the full stop. Say the no. I can't this week. Then stop. Count to 3 in your head before you say anything else. That's it. That's the whole ritual. Because the no was never the hard part. You can say no. What you can't do is leave it there. And the 3 seconds are long enough for the reflex to pass and short enough that the silence doesn't get strange. If after 3 seconds you genuinely want to offer a reason, offer it freely. That's an adult giving a gift. What you'll find is that most of the time you won't want to. And the other person will say, no worries, and move on. And they won't think about it again. So, adults advise, children explain. The yes you don't mean is the expensive one, and loving your work won't save you from it. Assertiveness isn't aggressive, and discomfort is a report about the other person. And your no needs somewhere to stand. If that last one landed, if what you actually heard in this episode is that you've been saying yes because you never settled on what saying no on your behalf of, then the book is where I'd send you. It's called The Catalytic Code, a framework for women who are ready to build from who they actually are. The catalytic system, purpose, performance, legacy, in that order and for that reason, and the 5 elements that have to line up before any of it holds. Start with a chapter on the elements. Then go and check which one your calendar is quietly betraying. The link is in the show notes. And when the schedule chapter finds you, because it will, send me a message. Those are my favorite ones to answer. This week's question: what's the one yes you're carrying that you don't actually mean? Just one. Send it to me on LinkedIn or Instagram or comment on the Substack. I read every message. And if you are listening to this thinking the real problem is that nobody ever asks you a second question on a Monday, that's what the Growth Collective is for. It's a small and honest room that's not for everyone. But if it's for you, details are in the show notes. If Amplify with Purpose served you today, follow the show, leave a quick review, and send this one to a friend who writes the 20-minute email. She knows, you know, because when you lead with purpose and deliver with consistency, you don't just succeed, you create impact that outlasts you.